Oh, well, Badge of Honour, and I'm Alan Curry. I've been discussing my police career and my background and where I came from to where I am at this relevant episode, shall we say. But one of the issues I think people sometimes don't recognise is, even though whatever rank I am, I always have a boss within the organisation who I can turn to for some issues, advice, guidance, and sometimes to get into trouble. But within the family life, I also have another boss, don't I? For those of you who are married, you'll understand that there's another boss somewhere. Now, it didn't matter, and I always took my wife to lots of places. She always said she wouldn't be a police widow. So when I did community forums and different issues, she went with me. But if I explain at the moment that my rank was inspector, she always told everybody she was the next rank up, the chief inspector. And the worst of it was, in some ways, the people recognised her more than they did me in the context. And somehow, to be able to bring your family life along with your professional life actually worked really well for me within the organisation. But let's just put in perspective, if you're married, you go home, I mentioned before, I've got to put the bins out. I'm the one who does the decorating. The car washing and gardening is all my job, and we have to do in relation to that. And of course, in the nicest possible way, and if you're married, you understand this. Wives are incredibly suspicious when you get in late or when you're not there at the same time. So of course, I dealt, I'm jumping a little ahead, but I dealt with a firearms incident where it came out of the blue. It was a very cold night. We had the firearms team behind me. I'm in charge. It took 2 to 3 hours to solve. Now, I should have been finished work at 5 o'clock. I didn't get home until 9:30. But when I was at the scene, I got there very quickly. And as a consequence, I only had my shirt on. So one of the firearms officers, who happened to be a female, and she was really good. So don't get me wrong about the fact it's female. It's about the ability to do the job. So this lady I'd worked with a number of times, very professional, and she just said to us, "Inspector, are you cold?" She said, "Do you want to borrow one of my coats?" So she did. She gave me a coat. I thought nothing of it. We resolved the issue. Everything was fine. And I get home at 9:30, and my wife says, "Where have you been?" So of course you tell the truth, because that's what we do as men, isn't it? We tell the truth, and I say, "We've had a firearms incident." And this is where you will understand, anybody who's married or even in a relationship with a female, shall we say, they have a brilliant sense of smell. So as a consequence, it's a bit I suppose I'm going to say like a dog smelling you, but I can just say her next to me, sniff, sniff, sniff. And of course I hadn't realised I'm smelling a perfume, aren't I? So I've been professional. I've done everything I'm supposed to do within the job. I get home and I'm smelling a perfume. To explain to my wife what I've been doing, this is not really a secret, but I'm going to share it with you. I spent the night in the spare room because she didn't actually believe me. So the point of the story is the fact that, yes, you've got a boss at work, but what about the home life and how that all fits in, and particularly with the wife, right? Okay, the children, grandchildren, I mentioned that. They're good fun. Some good stories with the grandchildren, but the wife never really believes where you've been. So you've got all these pressures at work, and then you come home, and yes, okay, I've been married 40 years. I wouldn't swap her for the world. But in some ways, she was particularly good at making me better, because her ability to keep me on my toes at home assisted me in some of my life skills in keeping me on my toes at work. And that's how, in the world in which we live in, you always have more than one boss. I've mentioned some of the incidents I've been involved with, and even when I go home, and I always used to discuss what I'd done, because she would ask, but she would even, in a very safe environment, as I used to do with my younger officers, she'd say, "Well, Alan, why did you do that? Or could you not have done this?" And in the cool light of day, sometimes some of the best debriefing of your ability, what you've done, what you could have done better, actually came from my wife. And that, in some ways, and well, I'm wrong to say in some ways, in a lot of ways, actually was the power behind the throne that allowed me to progress in the job. with a grounding. I didn't ever get carried away because I had a nice rank, because you could have a good rank in the organisation, but when you come home, you're the husband, and let's be fair, am I being cynical? Am I being correct? How many married men are out there? Who is the weaker sex? Is it the man or the woman in the relationship? Or do we just take the line of least resistance? I'm not sure, but I have a lot to thank my family and wife for that made me the person I ultimately ended up within the organisation. So, we've discussed quite a bit of me being in the rank of inspector. I tried earlier on to discuss the rank structure, and obviously part of my story is how I've progressed through the organisation. And I just concluded before there talking about the strength and power and having a good woman by your side, behind you, and in some ways in front of you. So I actually moved up to the next rank, which was Chief Inspector. Now it's a totally different thing. You're moving quite a bit from the operational role, but it's now got a lot of management to it. And within the context of the Chief Inspector role, I now have an overall responsibility along with another individual for over 200 police officers and staff. That's totally different, because now you've got your inspectors doing the job you were doing. And the big thing about learning is the fact that you know you can do the inspector's job, but you don't want to encroach on their ability to do their job. They only need to know that I'm about when they need me, or sometimes when the situation arises that they can't cope with, or it needs to go to a different level. And that's what I did as an inspector. I mentioned before, I had a person who was above me when I needed to go to. So I'm now at a location called Whitley Bay, which is in the Newcastle area. And we have a very vibrant nightlife, and I mean vibrant. Every bank holiday, the only thing the local newspapers wanted to know was how many people we'd arrested for drunkenness or antisocial behaviour. And it regularly ran at about 35 to 40 people in maybe a 10-hour period. But we knew that one of the larger establishments was having one or two little issues. So what we did was we do work with, it's not quite like on the television, but we do have officers who work in plain clothes and work in an undercover capacity. And we recognised by doing the nightlife scenario that we had significant drug dealing going on at a premises in the Tynemouth area. Now, this is a totally different perspective of dealing with a day-to-day telephone call incident where somebody rings up and there's a problem, stolen car, burglary, etc. This is about assimilating evidence, creating a file, and striking at the right time to ensure the individuals who are a scourge on society, particularly with drug dealing, are at the stage where basically once they're arrested, the evidence has already been achieved, as opposed to the other way around when you arrest somebody and have to find the evidence. So we spent 2 months with undercover officers dealing with this particular incident. We had the evidence, and it seems strange, but we bought an awful lot of drugs. Now, you don't expect your police officers to buy drugs, but obviously we're assimilating evidence. We're buying drugs, and it's at the time it was probably ahead of the game, so I'm not giving any state secrets away here. We bought drugs with £20 notes, but before we paid the £20 notes to the drug dealers, we photographed them and put them through the fax machine. So at the time, the fax was time and dated. So for argument's sake, at 10 o'clock at night, those £20 notes were in the police possession, and at 11 o'clock at night, they were in the possession of having bought drugs from the drug dealers. And that's how we managed to prove on a continual basis we were buying and selling, or not selling, we weren't selling, buying drugs, right? Of course, the next step is planning. And with the nicest perspective, when you're planning something like this, you can't let too many people know where you're going. Because if you've got 120, 180 police officers who know where they're going to raid the premises, well, even just talking to the family at home, word gets out. So it's a really top secret operation to deal. We were briefing and dealing with the planning way out of the locality where we were working. Eventually we fixed a date for what we would call the strike, and as a consequence I had again another 150 police officers. We had 24 police vans, and we had what was our tactical support group, who were the senior officers in relation to public order. And then we went to deal with this particular premises. We also had the undercover officers in. Anyway, we go to this premises and we have to seal the roads, put an outer cordon in, and we arrest the individuals involved. The problem occurred because there was a dance floor that we had over 200 people in this particular premises, which in theory should only hold 120. So now the police are well and truly outnumbered. As a consequence, we had about 30 people arrested. Every arrest then took 2 police officers. So at the end of maybe half an hour, 45 minutes of doing this, I'm now left standing as a chief inspector in the inner cordon with 2 other police officers and a dog. And the dog's got a little bit of a story for me, isn't it? But anyway, we managed that procedure. We arrested them. Ultimately, the premises were closed. The drug dealers went to prison. But the next step of this, and this is where it all comes into how you learn and plan, and some of the earlier things come together, was the fact that the press, the television, nationally and locally, want to know what you've done. These are big stories. So this is where you now move into another area of responsibility, which is doing the press conference or even just a stand-up interview. And I always remember, I'd learnt these words, but when I was asked the question, and I can repeat it now, I'd say, look, when we have information that there are dealings or problems, we will act swiftly and decisively to eradicate the problem. So, you know, I always remember those words, you know, I repeat them again, so, you know, we will act swiftly, decisively, and eradicate the problem. It sort of reminded me a little bit at the time, and somebody said that when they watched it. It's a bit like watching the film The Terminator or something like Arnie, but we just wanted to be positive and correct and ensure that the community knew we were acting on their behalf. And of course, we do get some training in the press, and that's how, as you progress within the organisation, you develop the skills and have different courses to do. And I was always taught that when you're talking to the press, there's 2 parts of things you do, and this is again not giving anything. If you've got an interview, now you know that not everything I would say in a press conference will be televised. There'll be a little bit of selective counting. But one thing we did always try to do was tell the truth. And this may be a little bit cynical about politicians who changed the conversation around a little bit. But we would generally asked factual questions and hopefully give you factual answers. But I was always taught, and you may not know this, but the first thing you ask the interviewer is, what's your first question going to be? And of course, once I've got the first question, I can move on. And the other side, from a police perspective, is we're always looking to ensure we get what we called our core message out. So I'd have the first question, and generally the core message would be something like, we are looking for witnesses, anybody seen this, contact this number. But when you've got different, and let's say quality of interviewers, not everything goes well. And there's a number of times where we have to say, stop, start again. And then of course, you know, there are the stupid questions which maybe are asked and you give an answer, but you think, what a silly question. You know, what colour was that black car? I mean, you know, and I've had that one when we're asking for witnesses or whatever. When the interviewer would say, what colour was that black car? Well, where do you go to a question for an answer to a question where the answer is in the question, if that makes sense? You know, how tall was the man who ran away when we're talking about females? So we are trying, and I'm trying to be my best professionally, and let's be fair, there's some very professional interviewers. But the other side of things is some of the interviewers are learning their skills at the same time and manage to ask, let's say, less than professional questions. I was going to use another phrase there, but on the same token. And so you do get, and then of course there's the television interview, which is even worse. in the context of sitting in front of somebody, asking a question. And if even as I'm standing here now and talking to yourself, it's the issue about sometimes, and I'll do it now just for an example, but I always worried when I was speaking to people or talking to people when they ask a question and they look away and they can't give you eye contact and they do the issues of turning their body. So there's a lot in body language. And again, television interviews and interviewers, as well as being the interviewee, is a different skill. And some of those issues that arose, yes, they're humorous. And you know, there's one that's particularly good. And it was a firearms incident, actually. We were doing a documentary and the interviewer was talking to the police officer who'd been dealing with this particular firearms incident. And of course, we put the masks on them because they can't be seen. We played a game. He was standing with his rifle, gun, whatever it was. And the interviewer said to the officer, he said, and what did you feel about the incident? Were you frightened? And the officer said, no, we trained very hard. We are very professional. And just at that moment, the magazine dropped out of his gun and fell on the floor. I mean, you couldn't get a worse situation from a police perspective of telling everybody how professional we are as the magazine drops out of the floor. And of course, the officer who was dead concerned, because if you're a firearms officer, it really is the worst possible thing that can happen to you. And he said to me, he said, Inspector, he says, you won't tell anybody, will you? Because there was only the two of us there. And I couldn't resist it. I said, no, look, don't worry. I can keep a secret. It's the people I tell who can't. Well, that's my career up to date. But it would appear in the finest traditions of a movie star, I'll be back on South Asia TV.